Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for Marc and people who are joining us from overseas. So I'm very glad to welcome you for that Zoom. It will be a lecture by Marc Mayer on the occasion of our Art Basel OVR participation, featuring Sophie Ristelhueber in this new edition entitled Pioneers. I will just make it short. I wanted to welcome you, and I will ask Camille here to introduce Marc Mayer. Thank you very much, Marc, who you know very well the work of Sophie, and you were the best place to speak about her work. So Camille, please.
Yes, so hello everybody, and thank you very much for being here. As Jerome said, we're very happy to welcome you, and especially thank you to Marc for accepting our invitation to talk today. So for those of you that are not entirely familiar with Marc, he was an important figure of contemporary art in North America, holding senior and directorial positions in many important institutions such as the National Gallery of Canada, the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Montreal, the Power Plant, the Contemporary Art Gallery of Toronto, or the Albright-Knox Gallery. He gives lectures extensively and writes very much. But more importantly, he's a very passionate and connoisseur person of Sophie's work. So he's mainly curated like 3 exhibitions of Sophie's, for example, at the Albright-Knox Gallery and at the Power Plant. And he's also written the text that accompanies an edition of called Books on Books, that is a kind of like reprint of Sophie's important book on her series Fait, that Marc is probably going to talk about. So yes, just a very expert person on Sophie's work. So we're very happy that he's able to talk about Sophie's work today. So Marc, now the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Can everyone hear me? Great, that's terrific. First of all, I want to thank you, Camille, because I'm a man of many thumbs and few skills, and the presentation that you've prepared for me, that you're the one who built this presentation. I'm very grateful for your help. And Camille is also the person who's responsible at the Galerie Poggi Gallery for Sophie and her work. So she's the person whose name you want to write down if you're interested in pursuing getting more information, or perhaps getting very serious. I am unmuted. Now I can't hear you. Were you censoring me because I was thanking you? Is that what's going on?
Sorry.
And I also want to thank Jérôme. This is the first public talk that I've given in over a year. And that's the longest I've gone in 30 years. So I'm a little bit rusty. And it's my very first Zoom presentation. I've been in Zoom many times, but it's the first time I've actually spoken to a group on Zoom. And so that's also making me a little bit nervous. To get right into it, I wanted to, of course, I wanted to give a little brief introduction about who Sophie Ristelhueber is. I call her Sophie Ristelhueber. That's how you pronounce her name in French. But you can say Sophie Ristelhueber. That's the accepted pronunciation in English and even in German, for that matter. She was born in 1949 in Paris, where she still lives. Her education was not in art. She didn't go to art school or photography school. She studied literature. In fact, she has a master's degree from the Sorbonne and was headed for a PhD when, of course, she was derailed by a job offer, and she worked at the ripe old age of 23 for a startup magazine called Zoom. It was a general interest visual culture magazine. So there's art, there was advertising, cartoons, all of visual culture. So she went from the word to the image and really plunged right into the image with this job and made a name for herself in the publishing field very early. To the point where she eventually had to make a decision, and she decided that she was not going to pursue that work and was going to instead become an artist. Now, she apprenticed with a very famous photojournalist named Raymond Depardon. He won a Pulitzer Prize in the 1970s for his work on Chad. He's also got multiple Césars for his documentary films. So she really went to the good school, but not as a photojournalist. She studied really the medium of photography with Depardon. Now, the best way to approach her work, because she's definitely a pioneer, and her pioneering years are not behind her. She's definitely a pioneer in the present as well. She's a very unique artist, and not just because she didn't go to art school. She's really fascinating, and her work is, it can be troubling, it can be sometimes challenging, it's always beautiful, but even that beauty is troubling. But you have to know something preliminary to looking at the work to really get it. Otherwise, you're going to misunderstand. And she's an artist who's been frequently misunderstood. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you all see this, the cover image of Mark Scars Borders?
Yes,
Okay.
it's perfect.
So Sophie is, and I'm using a lot of her language and I'm adding a little bit of mine. She's on a quest to find forms to express her metaphor. Now, that's kind of standard procedure for an artist, the search for forms. But what is this metaphor? And it's kind of hard to describe. And I think the best way to describe it is that it's an aggregate of synonyms, words that all have a family resemblance to each other and will remind you of each other. And in fact, poetically are often interchangeable. And that's marks, scars, borders, wounds, sutures, incisions, craters, bomb craters, all these kinds of deliberate marks that are made by mankind on the world. And she talks about being fascinated by the traces of a human presence in the world. And she finds it in many different places, but she has found it. In fact, she's found the motherlode of marks, of deliberate marks in war zones. So she's been mistaken for a war correspondent, a war artist, which she is not. She's not a photojournalist, not at all. And you'll see through the process here of looking at the corpus that this is not at all what you would think given the apparent subject. Now, these synonyms kind of gravitate around a nucleus that I call the original moment of semiosis. And semiosis is that process where a thing turns into a form, or sorry, a sign or a symbol. We're all living through that now with the face mask that just meant you're a nurse or you're a doctor, but now the face mask is a sign that we see everywhere in every shop, every public building. So it's still in the process of being transformed into a sign, but that's what semiosis is a thing that is being transformed. The first time a human being put a mark in the dirt, let's say, this metaphysical mark, that is the original moment when one of our very deep ancestors said, oh, this mark or this scratch on a rock could represent something else. It's the eureka moment, which I think is the big bang of our species in many ways. It's the birth of art, the birth of writing, the birth of mathematics, and therefore pretty much the birth of who we are and what we've been about. And the symbiosis, although there are plants and animals that also use symbiosis, nothing has ever gone as far as we have with this process. And I'm going to show you the qualify symbiosis throughout this talk. This is a photograph here. We're going to be talking about this work a little bit longer because it's one that I acquired for the National Gallery, and I have a long history with it. I wrote the grant that paid for its production back in the day in the 1990s. It's fait, but we're going to start on her quest, and our first stop is not this work. Our first stop is not moving. Oh yes, I figured it out. Well, this is Sophie Ristelhueber. I love this picture of her because I love this woman, and she's not only one of my all-time favorite artists, she's also somebody I really admire a lot. And this is a quote from her. Now let me see if I can't. I have obsessions I don't fully understand: the deep mark, the scarred surface, the scars, the traces that human beings leave on the earth. But it's not a commentary on the environment. In a way, I'm an artist who would rather work like an archaeologist. She's not the apparent subject that we're going to be seeing in her work is not really her subject. Her subject is this metaphor. It's the meta subject that is the quest for the marks. And on the first, oh, here I go again. Was I able? Oh, there. Whoops, sorry. I'm getting a little. First stop is Beirut. She went to Beirut in 82. You'll remember that Beirut was bombed into smithereens in 82. 500 buildings in that city were destroyed. The Israeli Defense Forces were trying to flush out the PLO, and it's very easy in all of Sophie's work to get completely distracted and sidelined by all kinds of things, by geography, but especially by history, by politics, by all kinds of subjects that are not her subject. But the nominal subject in this case is Beirut. The full title was Beirut Photographs, 1984. What you're looking at here is one of the set of these photographs. She went to Beirut to photograph what a modern city in ruins looks like. We're familiar with ancient cities in ruins. Very familiar. In fact, ruins and false ruins were very much part of the culture in the 18th and 19th century. Aristocrats were building false ruins as follies on their property. And this is a little bit related to that. That's a wink to Hadrian's villa in the background. And we're looking at the French embassy in Beirut that's been destroyed. The pool. This would have been in a shelter magazine. This would have been in color, and it would have been, had it not been destroyed, and it would have been a double-page spread. What she's doing in this series is not only documenting a city in ruins, but there are also references to the conventions of commercial photography, of shelter magazine photography, and the kinds of photographs you'd see in magazines, like that double-page spread that I showed you. This on the left is this was a brewery, Jupiter. Jupiter, of course, is a fairly significant word because there was the temple of Jupiter just a few kilometers north of Beirut in a city called Baalbek that had the largest temple in the Roman Empire. It was destroyed actually a few times. And so, although Beirut is a modern city, you're seeing high-rise apartment buildings. There are literally thousands of buildings that look exactly like this in Canada, where I come from, and in the United States and in Western Europe. So what does a modern ruin look like? It's very different from classical ruin, or even the ruins of the older cities in the First and Second World War. So that is fascinating. But also this play with the conventions of commercial photography. But Beirut is not only a modern city, it's actually 5,000 years old. It was a Phoenician city. It's one of the first cities. So the subject of history and these kinds of connotations are very, very hard to separate from the project, this formalist project, a search for form that the artist has. This is, I don't have to tell you what it is, the mobile sign that's all shot up with bullet holes. This is also a region generally that's known for a lot of turf battles for oil. This is how the work is installed, and this is very much a hallmark of how Sophie works. The images are always different with each work, and the works are presented in a different way. She thinks a lot about how to present the works. So it's very unusual to see the bottom unified like this for these prints. Normally when you hang photographs, you hang them with the center being the same in every photograph. And so here she's used the bottom as the unifying organizing principle of the way she's displayed them. And they're unusually very, very close together, which gives it a feel of almost a kind of a writing, a semaphore, or even a very stylized skyline, emphasizing the idea that she's making art about her subject is a ruined city. So this syncopation is also very interesting. The prints are in centimeters, they're 50 by 60. In inches, they're roughly 20 inches by 24 inches, just to give you a sense of the scale. The next stop is the Kuwaiti Desert. In 1991, I will talk about the photograph that really got her interested and made her go to Kuwait a little bit later, because it's related to another work more specifically. but she saw a photograph that she mistook for a work of art that was very familiar. And then when she opened the magazine, she realized that no, it wasn't that at all. It was, in fact, pictures of the Kuwaiti Desert. Now, of course, this was a gold mine for somebody who's searching for marks, significant marks, deliberate, meaningful marks made by mankind. The title of the work is also interesting. This is now the first time where she's becoming more ambiguous, and it's now you can't talk about the nominal subject because the name doesn't really relate in a direct way to the subject. So now I'm shifting more to the apparent subject. The apparent subject is ambiguous. What we're looking at is not quite clear, and the title of the work doesn't help you. Fait has two meanings in French. It means it's the past participle of the verb to do, so done. It also means fact, a simple fact, which is, I think, a key word in her entire corpus because she's very neutral in the subject matter. This neutrality that she's found through the rigor of a formal quest kind of protects her from having making a comment on the subject matter. She's staying nonpartisan, and it's very easy for her to do that because her subject is not the apparent subject, it's another subject. So the dumb fact, just the facts of a marked up desert. She actually went there about 6 months after the belligerents had gone home, the bodies had been removed. We're going to see a number of photographs, but this is one that I'm quite fond of because a few of the photographs are like a clin d'oeil, as we say in French. They're reminding you of very famous images in art history or the way another artist would have approached it. The whole overall effect of these photographs is really of almost mid-century abstraction for the most part. But this will remind you not only of the shoe that was thrown at President Bush at a lecture that he gave in the Middle East. You remember that famous scene when a man took his shoe off, and that's a kind of an act of defiance and humiliation. It also will remind you of Van Gogh's shoes that he painted 4 times. And there was a famous debate between the German philosopher Martin Heidegger in the early 60s and the American art historian Meyer Shapiro about Van Gogh's shoes. It looks very much like Van Gogh's shoes. Sophie knew exactly what she was doing when she took this picture. And there are a lot of these kinds of references to art history. This is another detail of something that she saw in the desert. This is an aerial shot. There are all kinds of different perspectives. You're in the air, you're on the ground, you're standing up, you're very close. It could be kind of a sketch out of a sketchbook by Kenneth Nolan or any of a large number of artists in mid-century who made these targets, but it's actually bombs. These are bomb craters. And bizarrely, they're quite beautiful, actually, these aureoles, these shapes. But they're not abstraction. Now you're getting a lot of details about what kind of war this is. This is a trench. There were a lot of bulldozers in this war. The Iraqis brought bulldozers with them to build trenches. We may see some glimpses of trenches. There are an awful lot of photographs of trenches in this piece. Now this was filled with oil and it was set on fire. This fellow was a little bit too much of a hurry, so he couldn't throw his match into the oil to either prevent the retreat or to help the retreat, because you've got this wall of fire in front of you. And that's another detail of this war. We have no idea what this is. Somebody went a little bit crazy with a bulldozer. This is an aerial view, believe it or not. We're very high up in the air. Makes no sense. Like someone was playing tic-tac-toe, someone gone mad perhaps. These are the sorts of things you would have seen in the First World War. In fact, the Iraqis were fighting the First World War. They built trenches all over this desert. Meanwhile, there weren't any ground troops on the other side. They're all in the air. So what good is a trench? Like, look at this, trench warfare with these bulldozed battlements. What was the point of this when a plane 30,000 feet above the air is just going to drop all of this material? These are bomb craters, if you imagine. So Needless to say, there were about, I think, about 250 casualties on the side of the coalition. These are 35 countries that allied themselves against Iraq and Saddam's troops. And about 1,000 Kuwaitis died, but between 25 and 50,000 Iraqis died. So they were overwhelmed. The story is that Saddam invaded Kuwait. He owed them an awful lot of money for oil, and he thought, two birds with one stone. I'll annex them and get rid of my debt, and also I now have their oil. Well, not so fast, Kimosabe. That is not exactly going to work when 35 countries are going to say, are going to prevent you from doing that. So it was a very unbalanced event. But there again, this is not.
Je vois deux, trois personnes en.
Pardon, Sophie, je t'entends. Oops. This is not her point. Her point is not that story. Her point is these very unusual forms. And these forms are a fascinating military document. On top of being an extraordinary work of art, it's something very useful. You can actually see what a war on a blank sheet of paper looks like. We're used to seeing pictures of war and of the materiel of the various belligerents, blown up buildings, blown up landscapes, animals, trees, plants, people. There's none of that here. The people, there were plenty of people, but they're long gone. It's quite fascinating what a war looks like when it's happened on a blank sheet of paper. It looks very often like mid-century abstraction. Here it is at Le Magasin in 1992, and here it is in 96 at MoMA. This is also, I saw this exhibition. It was a wonderful show by Peter Galassi, where I also saw the first Wolfgang Tillmans that I'd ever seen, and a number of other extraordinary artists. And this was not the first time I saw this work, but it was the first time I saw it installed in an institution. Here it is at the National Gallery. We broke down 3 walls to be able to put it all on one wall, to be able to see it for the first time on one continuous wall, but it's been shown in many different places in many different ways. It's definitely her most famous work. It was shown very early on at the Imperial War Museum, where it was called Aftermath. Unfortunately, well, it was a war museum after all, but the very poetical artistic title didn't suit their purposes. And here it is, just 4 of them. The effects I'm going to talk about in a moment they work even with 4. I acquired 6 for the Albright-Knox Art Gallery. Now, to give you a sense of how useful this is as a military document on top of being a work of art, when I was at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery, we had a big fundraising shindig. It was called Rockin' at the Knox. There were bands all over the building. And I was standing guard in front of these photographs that we had just acquired, and I was very proud of them. It was very early on in my relationship with this work and with the artist, because they're unglazed. They have no glass on them. This is a raw print here. There's not, they're just barely framed, they're unglazed, and they're unprotected. So I was terrified because all sorts of people, it was a very inexpensive fundraiser. There were a lot of people drinking in an art museum for the first time in their lives, and I was nervous. And I'm standing guard here, and here's a young man in a tuxedo with his girlfriend, and he is identifying all of the bombs and said, "Oh my God, this is so fascinating. Look, that's a cluster bomb, honey. That's exactly what that does," etc. So for military people, this is a very fascinating work of art. But for aesthetes like me, it's fascinating for different reasons. Now, this is how it was installed in Toronto, and what you're not seeing is that it's in a square room. That's why it's 4 high. You're completely surrounded by it. What is unusual about this work is something that I've said my whole life to people. If you're not standing in front of the actual work of art, you're not having the cultural experience. So the documentation is not actually pictures of a work of art in a book are really, they're not even third rate, they're Z rate. But we don't think of photographs that way. We don't think that if you didn't see the actual print, you didn't have the cultural experience, because photographs are so promiscuous. They take so many different forms. We don't really think of them as being unique. And if you think back to Walter Benjamin's famous essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, that's the point he was making. But Sophia's reversed and contradicted Walter Benjamin with this. There are effects of this work that do not translate to any kind of documentation. There's this uncanny warmth this heat that comes from the work. Now, yes, you're in a desert and it's going to, semiotically that pictures of the desert, this is a warm place, but she has emphasized this with the gilt frames. She hand painted wooden frames, and she did all this herself, and put these thin frames on the side, not so much to frame them, but to create this uncanny glow in the work that emphasizes the heat even more. The other thing that you're not going to experience is this bizarre sense, the illusion of three-dimensionality. These are, they're not flat prints, they're kind of boxes coming out of the wall. So again, there's a texture to the piece that suggests that perhaps the actual images themselves are also textured, that they're also reliefs in some way. So it comes to emphasize the sculptural quality of a lot of these pictures, the three-dimensionality of it. So you're not going to see that or feel that because you don't see this in 3 dimensions, but it is a three-dimensional experience because of the way that they're framed. The third thing, and more importantly, you're not going to get that lightheaded dizziness that you get from trying to figure out where you are in relation to this object. Not only are you trying to figure out the subject, and actually that's the classic question that you have to ask yourself with every work by Ristelhueber, what is the subject? What am I looking at? But in this case, you're also trying to figure out where you are or where the photographer is. Where are they? Are they in the sky? Are they very high in the sky? Are they low in the sky? Are they on the ground? Is she kneeling down? Is she looking from the side? Now you have to shift your point of view for every one of these 71 or 70 pictures that you're going to see. There's 71 total. That will make you a little bit lightheaded, I promise you. There again, you don't have that physiological effect of interacting with the work if you're only seeing it in reproduction. That's actually an achievement to do that with photographs, I have to say. There is way too much to say about this work. It's been shown all over the world many times in many different iterations, but we have to keep moving to follow her quest. Next stop, Sarajevo. So she went to Sarajevo in 1992 when it was under siege, if you can imagine. That may be why she doesn't have an awful lot of imitators, because she is quite fearless. Notice the title, Every One. She's severed the word in two. So she's taken a word that had originally been 2 words, created a new word very, very long ago in English, and she's severed it again. So she's made her own mark by returning these to 2 different works. Now, this is one of the tougher works in her corpus, because it was known that she had gone to Sarajevo, but she came back empty-handed. She was there for a couple of months. In fact, she wasn't the only artist who went to Sarajevo when it was under siege. You'll remember that Susan Sontag was there at the same time in solidarity with the people, as Sophie did. She had an exhibition in Sarajevo. She showed fair there, but very, very simple. She rolled them up under her arm and went to have an exhibition to bring culture to these people who were risking their lives every day by going to buy a carton of milk. Here is Every One installed. Now you can imagine here yet again another misunderstanding, because this work is going on during the civil war in the former Yugoslavia. Some people presume that she had lost her mind, lost all sense of judgment, and was taking pictures of people who've been ethnically cleansed, the victims of this horrible civil war. But no, she came back empty-handed from Sarajevo. She didn't find her form on that particular quest. She found her form to express that experience in Paris, and it's really quite ingenious, I think, because look at these. You can tell, I'm glad there's a figure here, much larger than life size, these prints. And what she's done is the metaphor of the scarred earth that she did in Fé, she returns that metaphor to the actual body and gives the body a new metaphor. It becomes a territory. It becomes a landscape at this scale. And because we know about Fé, we're seeing similar forms, similar shapes on the bodies that we saw on the desert. Well, that's very appropriate for a war that was, brother against brother. And in fact, in her artist book, there is a text by Thucydides that is uncanny in its contemporaneity, because it really feels like it was written in 1994, although it was written thousands of years earlier. And that text was about the Peloponnesian War. Here, This is a war where the civilians were not collateral damage. They were, in fact, the goal. They were, in fact, what people were fighting about. Get those people out of this is my country now. You have to leave. And all of the horrors that we remember from that war. So these are, however, these are not victims. These are patients. These marks, these are very much deliberate marks, but they're marks that were made by surgeons in order to save their lives. So they're not marks on the surface. They're actually what's left of surgery that someone has gone into their bodies to save their lives. So none of these should be sad pictures. They're happy pictures because these people got to either have that carcinoma or carcinogenic mold taken off of their nose, or have a kidney removed, or having a spinal cord injury corrected, that sort of thing. So it's not what you think, and yet there's a poetic, metaphoric relation to the Civil War in the former Yugoslavia, but also absolutely it's very consistent with her overall project of this search for forms. Here, I love this installation because you're getting to see the body and the landscape on the same surface. You're looking outside through these windows and having the double effect of the body turned into a territory. And here it was at the Musée Rodin. So we're talking about an artist who's exhibited very widely all over the place for many, many years. She's certainly not an unknown figure. And here she is at the Galerie Poggi in Paris with the same man with the zigzag scar. Now she went back to Bosnia and made another work called La Campagne. La Campagne is an ambiguous word like fait. It has two meanings. It means the countryside in French, but it also means a campaign, a military campaign, a political campaign, a fundraising campaign. The word it has both senses in French. Now, this time she did find her form, and this is probably the only work of hers that actually affected me emotionally in a way that's conventional. It made me cry. However, there are no scarred bodies here. There's nothing really disturbing. And I'll jump to an installation shot, and I'll go back to those in a minute. This is how the work was installed. So it looks like images from a trade show, maybe an engineering trade show, because we're seeing a lot of earthworks. And we're seeing the countryside, and we're seeing buildings. You can't quite figure out what this would have been, but it's obviously either going up on the wall or coming down from the wall, but it's not really the finished presentation. And they're installed on the floor like this in a very arbitrary way, very haphazard. And so what is it? Again, it's this question you ask yourself, what is the subject of this work? Well, these are photographs that she took, and here it is. Here's another installation. When I showed it at the power plant in Toronto, people thought that they were meant to move them around, and so they wanted to see underneath the photographs. And so we caught some people, a group of people moving the prints around. They're printed also very, very cheaply. These are thin paper color prints that are done very ephemeral on gator board. It's not a fine art object in any conventional way. Now, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast here. The picture on the right, what you're seeing is what an inmate from a concentration camp in Bosnia would have seen looking through the chain link fence. That's what this is, a countryside. That, of course, that's now she's moving into the psychological realm of the mark, of the traumatized, marked person, the marks on memory, the marks on experience, not the physical mark, but the psychological mark. And this is not an old ruin; it's a new ruin. That's what I think is another achievement here in the context of photographs, certainly of news photographs. She's giving you a second chance to actually feel this event, to actually perhaps find yourself, find room for a little empathy for the people in the former Yugoslavia and this horrible thing that's happening to them. Another moment of semiosis, and to underscore the idea of the instability of this semiotic process. If you see through the window here, that symbol, it's 4 C's with a cross in the middle. Now I've forgotten already what that literally means, but it's a Serbian nationalist symbol that goes back to the Middle Ages, and it's about solidarity. And that symbol is, there it is. These are actually S's. And each word in that sentence starts with an S, and it's about we will never be safe unless the Serbs are unified. So that's pretty innocuous. It's a symbol of solidarity. A people who've been conquered many, many, many times over the centuries. They're part of the Ottoman Empire and God knows what before that. So it has gone from being a symbol of solidarity, it's on the Serbian flag, it's on the Serbian coat of arms, to a symbol of terror and of fear and of marking territory. It becomes a kind of a swastika almost in this context. This would have been a Muslim-owned building or business, windows busted, everybody's gone, probably in camps, and they spray paint the national symbol on it. And that national symbol would have been seen quite a few times. So there again, that's the idea of the unstable semiotic article. So much for this one, a very moving work. Again, it's a departure. Now you're seeing a blown up road. It's a departure from what we're used to. Next up, and we're going to skip a few years now, is a work called WB. Now, the first thing I think of when I think of WB is Warner Brothers. I grew up with those cartoons, and those cartoons are always the same plot, always the same. There are two protagonists. There is Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, or there's Phil the Wolf and Sam the Sheepdog, or there is Tweety Bird and the Cat. There's Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. It's the same story every time. The comedy of mortal enmity. These are mortal enemies, and their job is to destroy each other. That's what those comedies, those cartoons are all about all the time. But the work is not about Warner Brothers. It's about the West Bank. And that's what WB stands for. And also, Sophie said that she also had in mind the man that on late night TV we used to call W, George Walker Bush, unlike his father, George Herbert Walker Bush. So W, also known as 42, is also something that may come to mind or may not. But really what she is, this time a nominal subject again, because it is the West Bank. The nominal subject and the apparent subject are the same, and that is the West Bank, but not just anyone back. Very specifically, these are landscape photographs, very much part of the landscape tradition of the back roads in the West Bank that have been rendered impassable by the state for reasons of security. Now, there are over 50 photographs in this series. They're installed a little bit like Fay on the wall, and you're having to change your perspective. But the one thing all of them have in common is that somewhere in the photograph, sometimes it's a close-up of it, sometimes it's a panoramic shot where you have to search for it, but somewhere is a road that has been blown up, blockaded, rendered impassable, so that it loses its function. Now, in terms of semiotics, a road is a mark. And so this is a mark that has been canceled by yet another mark. And here it is installed very differently than Fay, because the works are separated. But it's a catalog of ways of preventing people from using roads. You can either dump a whole bunch of debris on it, blow it up, erode it with big hoses, put some big concrete bollards on it, whatever. The other bizarre thing about this that makes it difficult is that you can't see it here, because again, if you're not standing in front of the work of art, you don't see it. These are actually beautiful photographs. The green is particularly beautiful in some of them. And so you have a sense of an unusual place. The West Bank is, I didn't know that the landscape was so beautiful with all these rocks and all this greenery. And that green really gets to you after a while. You are in nature back here. Now, what she did to photograph this, she of course talked her way onto airplanes and helicopters for Kuwait, for Fay. But here she had a van and had a platform built on the van, had to take many of these aerial shots, and had a ladder put on top of the platform. And she's a tall woman. She's about my height, about almost 5'11". And this is how she took these photographs. Now, terrifying, terrifying, on a ladder on top of a platform on top of a van. I don't think I would do that myself, but that's how she got these photographs. And she's presented them in different ways. This is another, there are other works by Sophie that she just simply prints directly onto the wall and makes them architectural. And some of these are really very effective. Now you have this hyper-modernist white space here with a picture of a ruined road that fills the entire wall. Here's another one. So we're in the West Bank. Now, if you think back to Beirut, and if you know your history, the shelling of Beirut kind of begins here. I don't want to rehearse that whole episode, but it's about the annexing of the West Bank by Jordan in 1940, and then by Israel in 1967. A lot of Palestinians, including the PLO, going to Jordan, not being very good house guests in Jordan, attempting many times to assassinate King Hussein. He chases them out into Lebanon, that is in full civil war. The Lebanese civil war lasted from 75 to 1990. The PLO are bombing the northern, they're terrorizing the northern towns of Israel. So they're being chased, and they take refuge in Beirut. And next thing you know, Beirut is in ruins. So there's a kind of a connection here. But there again, she's very strictly, very disciplined, following her metaphor. This is not a commentary on current events, but you can't help it. You can't help bringing that information and that knowledge to all of these works. Now, this is the genesis of Fait. This is a work called Because of Dust Breeding, and this is roughly the same place, roughly, that she found in the desert that reminded her of a small postage stamp image that she saw on the cover of Time magazine, walking down the street in one of those many kiosks they have in Paris that have magazines and newspapers. And she thought she saw this. This is Dust Breeding by Man Ray, a photograph from 1920. Duchamp was working on, in New York, on the large glass, The Bride Stripped Bare by her bachelor's Even, and that's his largest work, his most famous work. And he had gone back to Paris for a while and came back, and it was covered in dust. And Man Ray was one of his closest friends. He said, you should make a photograph of this. And it was a 24-hour exposure. It's a very long exposure that makes it look like a territory, like a landscape. And she thought that that's what she was seeing on the cover of Time magazine. Now, why would they be reproducing dust breeding? What is it, on exhibition somewhere? Has it been destroyed? Like, has it been stolen? What happened? When she opened the magazine, she realized that it wasn't dust breeding at all. And that, by the way, is a very famous work of modern art. They're photographs of the Kuwaiti Desert and of what that desert looks like. So she's made one-off work that is the genesis of Fait, and it was shown in an exhibition called A Handful of Dust, From the Cosmic to the Domestic, an exhibition by David Campany, and a wonderful show. I saw it here at the Ryerson Image Center. It's a terrific show, as you would expect from David Campany, and it was included in that show. It was also shown twice in New York City. In fact, it was shown at the Pratt Institute and also at MoMA PS1, but not in that show. It was included in another show. So this work has been is currently in New York, and it's traveled quite a bit. An important work, a kind of a key to her most famous work. Now we're getting to the last work I'm going to show you, and I really hope I haven't been talking too fast. And I hope I'm not going too fast, because I want to savor these things. This kind of surprised me, I have to say. This series, I was completely unexpected, and yet it just comes and reaffirms the high intelligence of this artist. She's not a production artist. Every project is different. She doesn't repeat herself. She may make works like Because of Dust Breeding that qualify another work, but it's very different. This one is also very, very different from a lot of her other works. And I'm going to tell you in a moment what you're looking at. There again, the subject is very ambiguous. What am I looking at, and where am I? Well, in this particular case, you're looking at the asphalt in Paris, in a street in Paris, and you're looking at it from very, very close up with what they call buboes, almost like as if the asphalt has bubonic plague here. That's what people with bubonic plague look like. They have these bumps on their bodies. Now, she's shown these together with photographs that she took of the Dead Sea. Well, speaking of metaphors, we talk about the Dead Sea. It's been called the Dead Sea forever because the salinity is so high that the fish, 33% salinity, there's not a lot of saltwater fish in there. There aren't any plants that can grow in there. However, it's not actually literally dead because it has a corolla of fresh water. Now, unfortunately, the billions of gallons of fresh water that pour into the Dead Sea and make and create life at the edge of the Dead Sea are pretty much shriveling up. The Jordanians have mined tributaries to the Jordan River that was a freshwater river bringing fresh water to the Dead Sea. And so that fresh water is now serving other purposes in Jordan. The Israelis are pumping the water to remove mineral. It's a very mineral-rich water. There isn't only 33% salinity. There are other minerals in there too. So the Dead Sea is shrinking. And as it shrinks, this freshwater corolla is dissolving the salt deposits under, in the what is that called, in the water table, creating these pock marks, these potholes, and the earth is collapsing. These are actually aerial photographs that you're seeing on the left and on the extreme right. The middle is Paris again. They're all color photographs, by the way. They're quite large. And so she really liked the idea of a place that's so rich with history, and not just recent history, going back to the beginning of civilization. These are the first cities are in this region, the development of agriculture, etc. So countless centuries of history, we have no idea how far back, is in this place, and the land that has supported this history is literally swallowing itself in a way. She kind of liked that idea poetically, and it's quite powerful. However, these are not direct marks made by man, they're indirect marks. They are the result of human activity. They're still traces of human activity, but not the direct traces. They're, and you couldn't say inadvertent because this has been going on for a while. The Dead Sea, which was dead metaphorically, is now literally dying. It's no longer a metaphor, it's fact. And it is shrinking and causing these forms to occur. I think that, I'll get to the title in a second. I think that's really, it's quite powerful as a next work in the sequence of works that we've seen, and I've skipped a lot of her works because we don't really have the time to go into this very, very rich and fascinating career. Sunset Years. Now she has a long career now, even though she started late. A very rich and rewarding artist to follow has been my experience. And she's kind of talking about the sunset years, in an ironic way, in a kind of glib way about her project. But bizarrely, Sunset Years, it also refers to this region in a strange way, because what we now call the Middle East was for a very long time called the Levant. And the Levant comes from le Levant, which means rising. It's where the sun rises. It's in the east. So it was called the Levant and the Levant by most Europeans for a very long time. It actually initiated with the Italians, Levante, and for the Italians, Levante meant everything east of Venice. Now, the land of where the sun rises, these are the sunset years of that place. It's also the sunset years of our species. That didn't start there, but civilization has caused this risk to our survival. Our habitat is in trouble. And when this could have been, she could have been included in that film by Ed Bertinsky, Jennifer Bechwal and Nicolas Depensier. It was called The Anthropocene, because what she's also doing is recording the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is the geologic time that many geologists think that we are now living in, and we were out of the Holocene. The Earth is no longer described, or no longer a result, or doesn't look like the process of glaciation. It's really the presence of humanity that is determining what the geological record looks like. If you haven't seen that film, by the way, it's very much worthwhile. And these could have been participating in that film as well, because this is about the Anthropocene, very much so. So she's taking us now into a whole different direction. She's always expanding her metaphor, but those synonyms are still synonyms. They still work almost interchangeably with each other poetically. And her quest is taking her very often to the same places, but taking her different places thematically and conceptually as well. So really fascinating artist to follow. And here it is again, they're very beautiful prints. They could be, again, mid-century abstractions. They remind me of Aaron Siskind. In fact, there are many little glimpses of Aaron Siskind in Fait. There are glimpses of Aaron Siskind here. He was a mid-century photographer who made photographs, very, very abstract looking photographs of details of the world. And Sophie makes photographs of details of the world too. Some of them are tiny details and some of them are very large details. But you can think of Alberto Burri on this one here on the left. So very much a modern artist formally, but not a modern artist. She's much more of a conceptual artist. And her concept is very beautiful. It's an exquisite thing. It's very elegant, this quest for forms to express a metaphor made of an aggregate of synonyms that are all radiating around the nucleus of the primordial, original semiotic moment of our species. Powerful stuff. Here is another installation view at the ZKM. And with that, I will now give you back my face and invite you to ask questions. Or if Sophie is there and she wants to qualify anything or add something that I may have missed, I'm always happy to hear from Sophie, and I'm sure you will too, because she can't hide. I heard her voice. She had her sound off for a moment.
Well, it looks like Sophie doesn't want to say anything.
Well, she's welcome not to either. I mean, she's a free woman.
And so just to tell you, like, feel free to ask questions through the chat as well. Maybe I'll kick off and ask one question. And just before that, I wanted to extend my apologies to those of you that had technical problems entering the Zoom reunion. But maybe to circle back to the event, I know you didn't want to talk about that like for the conference, but I think it's still an interesting question to you, Marc. Is asking the ways in which you feel that Sophie was a pioneer for the history of art or the history of photography. I think, you know, placing Sophie within like the realm of fine art, like you did, instead of like photography, is an interesting topic. And I think that there's a pioneering aspect to that. So maybe you could talk about that.
Well, I'm being distracted by these notes I'm getting on the chat here. Thank you very much, Marta. That was lovely. Thank you for that. A pioneer in the sense that, you know, her career begins, it's very much around the same time that photography shifted into really the center of contemporary art practice. These used to be separate worlds. There was the world of, you were either a photography or a photographer, excuse me, or an artist. Now, and yes, there were plenty of photographers who were considered artists. I don't want to generalize too much. That's a little bit ridiculous because photography is very much an art form, but it's also a lot of other things as well. I remember very much when I used to talk about the difference between photography and photography, which those of us, you know, who work in this field will get that a little bit of a joke, but that's really what happened. Photography changed. It became something else. A lot of artists started using photographs instead of painting, instead of sculpture, instead of installations, and that they were making photographs. We call them photo-based artists. Cindy Sherman, you know, there's a very long list of those artists. And that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. It's very much that shifting moment. And she's a pioneer of that. But she's also, what is unique, I think, about her practice, she's not a visual artist who was taking photographs as her medium. She brought along with her the lore of photography and the forms that we're used to, the conventions. This is someone who, oh, that's a very interesting note. Oh, I'm so distracted by these notes. I'm gonna have to say this one because it's true. She's a pioneer of confusing art and photography. It's not, we're just moving from the photography world into the art world. That's, with her, that's not really 100% what happens. It's hard to separate. It's hard to tell the difference. And a lot of people misunderstand her as a photojournalist and a war artist. And it's hard for her to struggle against it because so many of her works are about, the subject is war, the apparent subject. So this ambiguity between photography and art is something that I think that she's really carved out her own territory in that, because a lot of her work is almost, can be taken as a commentary, although she wants to have nothing to do with the idea that she's commenting on photojournalism or war photography. That's not her project at all. She's not thinking about that. She's not concerned with that. She's concerned about her project. However, the viewer can be confused and can kind of, there's the whole baggage of photography that she brought with her to contemporary art. And there, I think she's quite unique and very much a pioneer. Now, photography, photographs, and the use of photographs is standard procedure in contemporary art. It's, no one would question it. It's not unusual. It's very, very, very common. I remember in the early 2000s when there were a lot of collectors were only collecting photographs by artists. So, I like to see photographs and paintings and sculptures and all of them all together. But anyway, I digress. So in that respect, she's a pioneer. But when I say her pioneering years are not behind her, she's still very much a pioneer currently, is that she has it's very difficult to imitate her. I don't know, perhaps I've been out of touch, but I don't see a lot of artists working in the same, risking their lives and going to war zones in a city like Sarajevo under siege, walking around in a territory that's full of mines to get the right shot. You could also have been blown up, that sort of thing. That's not for the faint of heart, and there aren't a lot of artists who follow her there. Sorry for the long-winded response. And I saw some questions on the chat that maybe I can get to those. Oh yes, from Michael Jarvis, fait can also mean made, as in fait au Canada. And it's true, made, as in made in China. On a label, you'll see fait en Chine. So it has this third meaning again, and I stand corrected. Thank you for the compliment. Mark, how does Sophie decide on her destinations? What trigger? Oh, this is a good question. And it's a point I wanted to make. Although she's a French artist, she's not exactly Cartesian. This is an artist who really goes with her gut. Intuition is very important to her. That's how she goes from project to project. And when you don't have really a lot of predecessors to look for hints or instructions, you've got to pretty much make it, she's invented her project almost from scratch. You're going to rely on your intuition a lot. And it's really this intuition of this place is going to be, now she didn't find her forms when she went to Sarajevo, but she found it when she went back to Bosnia. So this is an artist who's really going by her gut from project to project, assuming that this place is going to have a lot of examples of the forms that can best express her metaphor. So that's the answer to that question. Let me see. Les photos de Sophie sont des représentations des conséquences de la violence humaine, guerre naturelle. Elles sont la représentation du chaos. Est-ce que je me trompe? Mais non, vous vous trompez pas. Ça vous dérange pas? So the question was, am I mistaken in believing that her works are always representations of violence, human violence, war, natural violence, and the earth, etc.? Well, no, because she could have, on her quest to find the forms to express her metaphor, she could have gone in some very, very different places. And she does go to very, very different places. She works a lot with texts. And I've got here a copy of her very famous artist book, Fait, with all of the photographs from Fait. It's Well, you're not going to find one. I've been trying to find one, not to buy it, just to be curious about how much they're going for these days. And I haven't found a single one, not on Alibris, not on eBay, not on anything. So they're becoming very, very rare, and they're very expensive. But one little detail here, because the marks in language and the effects of language, writing is mark making, speaking is mark making. This is just a kind of a sample from Clausewitz on war. And what's bizarre and what's this uncanny similarity between these images of hers, there's one of those famous trenches, and von Clausewitz is extremely abstract. At some point you can be reading von Clausewitz and say, is he really talking about death and destruction? I mean, war is violence. And you have this sense that part about war has gone over the great theoretician of war, von Clausewitz, because the language is so abstract and theoretical, as abstract as Sophie's pictures are. So marks on the language, marks, psychological marks, all of this stuff. Yes, of course, she has chosen these places. And yes, you can't separate the violence, but I think it's also important to underscore the violence of mark making. That very first mark, it was you have violated the integrity of the surface of the dirt by putting your finger in it that way. I mean, it's impossible to avoid that. Okay, now thank you, Michael Jarvis again. This is also very interesting, except that I don't have any Spanish. I've got French and German. Apparently the Mexicans say of the Rio Grande border, no es una frontera, es una herida. It's, oh yeah, when you translate it, well, how convenient. It's not a border, it's a wound. Well, there you go. Thank you, Mexico, for making my point and making Sophie's point. Borders are also scars, and borders are also completely abstract. Why is there a border here as opposed to there? I mean, some borders are natural. Well, no, there's nothing natural about a border, but some occur in places that are where you would think, well, there's a convenient place to put a border, a river, for example, the River Jordan or the Rio Grande. But they're all metaphors and they're all interrelated to each other. Any other questions? Any spoken questions? Is that possible, Camille?
Mark, yes, it's totally possible. And I think you've missed Marta's question that was at the very top of the chat.
Not my dear Marta. Did you pass the Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'll find out after the talk if Sophie approves of my interpretation. But I think in general, she does. Thank you for that question, Marta. I have had many conversations with her, and I tried out my semiotic thing, and she said, well, this is not me, this is you talking. And so, yes, I'm the guy with the original moment of semiosis. That's not her. However, I've known her for a very long time. And although this is a private conversation, I have, just to defend myself, I do remember her telling me many years ago in the 90s about one of the things she's getting at is this notion of the original mark that was not just a mark, or was that the first time a mark became a symbol. And I remember her telling me that, so I didn't invent it. However, she doesn't remember that. But we're all getting old, except I'm not getting old. I remember everything. Just a warning for all of you.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Marc? Oui, j'ai juste une petite question. Bonjour. Oui. Comment travaille-t-il avec les conservateurs? Quelle est sa relation avec, justement, avec les conservateurs dans les différentes institutions que tu as dirigées?
La relation de
Sophie avec les conservateurs, est-ce que c'est une collaboration, un échange? Elle a l'air très en contrôle de l'accrochage, par exemple.
Bien sûr, parce que l'accrochage... Bon, sorry. I wonder, ça ne dérange pas si je réponds en anglais?
No, of course. I should have asked it in English.
No, that's all right. So what is her relationship to the curators that she's worked with? And does she let the curator get a hand in the installations of the work, etc.? Actually, no, because the installation is very much part of the work. So all of those effects of fait that I described, the illusion of three-dimensionality, the warmth, the disorientation of the viewer, no, that's part of her intention. It's really, she's very much involved in, she determines the installation. She's a wonderful artist to work with. When you get it right, she's very generous. But she's also a challenging artist, so it takes a while to get it right. In fact, the first text that I wrote on her work that that I sent to her for her approval, she very, very kindly but firmly sent it back to me and said, "This isn't me at all. Sorry, you're writing about some other artist. It's well written, but it's not my work." And that was very early in my career, and it was an important lesson for me to work a little harder and to have much more of a dialogue with the artist. You're not the expert on the artist's work. The artist is the expert on their work. And that was just a little bit moment of chastening that was extremely helpful for me in the beginning of my career, I must say. Well, if that's...
I think there's one last question in the chat, Mark.
Oh, pardon. Yes, I'm not good at being Mr. Bojangles here. Are some of her works in editions? Yes, some of her works are in editions. Thank you, Joanne Todd. Thank you. Yes, her works are in editions. I'm not the expert on the editions, however. That's not something that I've concerned myself with. Of course, I very much concern myself with editions when I'm acquiring her work for a public institution. I want to know all about the editions. However, many of their works are in editions, and some of them change their form as well, depending on the context. She can be flexible. Some works are not very flexible, others are. I had more installation shots of Beirut, for example, showing it slightly differently, and Fay has been shown slightly differently, but I very much like the triple layer work that she's doing. I think that, for example, there are individual works of Fay still available, which surprises me because it's so famous, but you can't buy the whole thing because the National Gallery of Canada has the only entire copy, the one full copy of that work, but you can still get individual works and I think maybe a couple of groups, but I'm sure that that's dwindling. Mind you, there's 71 of them, so there's a lot of material there. Did that answer your question, Joanne?
I have a question.
Yes, Michael.
You were talking about the sort of fragility of the photographs when they were in an exhibition, but surely she must have the original, I don't know, negative of the photos.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So
However,
if they were lost, they could be repeated.
Yes, but if you've spent enough time arguing with conservators as I have, you know that reproducing one photograph in a group of 71 is not going to be, it's very, very hard. It's brand new, so it has different qualities. It's going to be very hard to get it to look exactly the way particularly if it's something that was printed in 1996, let's say, we're printing it in 2021 or 22, it's going to be very hard to get it to look just right so that it fits in because the other prints are much older. So yes, I mean, if something is damaged, it can be replaced, but you really don't want to do that. I'm glad you actually asked that question, because this is a fetish that we have in the art world as opposed to the photography world, about the thing is the thing. And you often have arguments between the artist and, I remember, I won't mention the artist and the curator. The artist is asked you to borrow it, to please approve the request to borrow it for a big show. And by the way, I'd like to repaint my sculpture. No, it's old. So no, you don't get to repaint your sculpture. We like it just the way it is. Yeah, there are nicks and marks and things, but this is an object and its history has to be born. And now it's a very complicated subject because how many old masters have had big parts of them repainted. There are paintings that are very famous that are the surface you're looking at was actually painted by a picture restorer and not by Leonardo, let's say. I don't think Leonardo had a black background in Salvator Mundi, if indeed it is a painting by Leonardo. So this is probably the #1 subject of controversy and conversation between artists, curators, and conservators, is this issue of what is the sacrosanct thing that doesn't get touched. So yeah, you want to avoid that as much as possible. And it is terrifying when you love something as much as I love Fay, to be at a big giant cocktail party with bands and young people drinking. I remember someone pointing at me and laughing. Look at him, he's terrified. Do I get lunch now?
Yes.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for coming and thank you for your attention. And I'm feeling human again, my first talk in over a year. And again, I want to thank Camille Bréchignac and Jérôme Poggi very much for this invitation. And of course, the extraordinary, remarkable, wonderful Sophie Ristelhueber.
And thank you as well very much, Marc, for accepting our invitation, and to you all for participating and asking questions. It's very much appreciated. And my apologies again to those who had troubles joining us.
And I will sign off.
Have a great day.